I think with that, as we always do, we'll start with the mission moment. And so I want to celebrate and honor the work that our schools do in honoring Black History Month and Black history and culture across our sites. And so a host of events took place over the course of the month, and they were impressive. And so I want to just sort of highlight a couple of those events and what they mean for community, because I think they're important. And so we had our high school step team come down to our middle school and perform. This was late in the month, I guess even 2 weeks ago. We've got a really solid step team, and like they're adored by our underclassmen and our middle school students. And so these are our leaders. So they're up on stage. The performance that they put forth is called Dare to Be Bold, which I think is a theme that carried forth coming from our community in honor of Black history. And they were terrific and impressive and inspiring. So lots to be proud of there. In addition to that, we had our middle school dance team performing during an assembly on a Wednesday, I think at the mid-month mark. Really impressive team under Miss McCrae. And so you see them on the left as a part of the performance, holding up different images and messages reflecting Black history for them. And so really proud of that. And then we had a guest speaker who is a good friend of our recruitment manager at the middle school, grew up in Bed-Stuy, attended Bed-Stuy schools, and told his story. And so you see the image just to his left. And it says life at the top. And he was telling kind of his story about kind of where he's been, what he's been through, the ups and downs in life, and where he is now. And so really tremendous speaker, connected with kids. And I think he kind of underlined that message of dare to be bold and, get after things, show up. And there are going to be ups and downs in life, but typically more ups than downs if you stay with it. And so um, he now works for Google as a rep for them, and he is a very promising Unity Advisory Council member, I hope. So that's the next move for me, is to get him on that council so that he's able to kind of stay connected with our community. But a good series of events. In addition to that, we had a series of workshops that were staff and family driven and facilitated, which is really powerful. And so workshops included learning about Black inventors, uh, historical Black colleges and universities, and African Americans in fashion and professional sports. And we had a group of parents. I mean, this was the first time for us of our families, our parents, creating vision boards and facilitating the creation of vision boards to celebrate Black history and culture at the school. So really good to see family members in the mix too. That's something we want to build on, that creates powering communities, powerful communities, and ones that I think really are good for kids. So a good month for us, a proud showing, and always look to build on it from one year to the next. And I think we're doing that successfully thus far. So that's the mission moment for tonight. There's a second bit I want to build in, which I think is also important to our mission as a school. And so in addition to Black History Month, we also have some updated data. And I thought that it was just good to kind of talk about it a bit here. This was something we discussed during the SLC meeting on Thursday, but here are graduation forecasts, updated graduation forecasts as of early March and where we are. And I think the headline here is we're in a similar place, maybe a slightly better place than where we were back in December when we last brought this information to you all. 84% of our students are in really good standing and are set to graduate in June. We've got 7 students that are on watch or off track due to Regents exams or course credits. And so we're focusing on those students right now. I'll say a bit more about that momentarily. And we've got 5 students who are not expected to graduate. And so 2 of those students do not attend our school, but are on our roster, so count toward graduation, and a few other students that it may take more time beyond 4 years to earn that diploma to then move forward. In terms of interventions, we're thinking about like, what do we do in the event of a student being deficient with the Regents exam credits? And then what do we do and how are we supporting students who are deficient with their course credits? And so our senior director of academic counseling is sort of leading the cause with what we're doing in support of these students, such that we're meeting our target, meeting our mark, having as many of our kids walk in 4 years who are ready to do so and then enter college or career. And so you'll see those listed. I won't go into detail there, but I think there's some solid plans in place for what we're doing over the course of the next few months to position kids to be well equipped to earn their diploma. And I think right now the forecast for us is very similar to where it was in December. We're looking at 89 to 93% of our students graduating in 4 years. The goal for us annually is 93%. So we're on par and in line to meet that goal. Before we move on, are there any questions or observations about where we are as of March? Terrific. All right. So, general headlines for essentially the 117th day of the school year. It's flying by, but there's still lots of good work to do. So let me share kind of where we are. We met just over a month ago in January, and so a lot goes on in February, even if it is a short month. So let me kind of give you a sense of what has been happening at school. So enrollment wise, we're strong. We're at 551. So we've actually shown an increase over the past several months with enrollment. And so that compares to 545 as of last month. And so our team is doing good work in connecting with families that are looking for the right option for them. And so heavily and healthily enrolled at both sites at this point in time. With regard to staffing right now, we do have 3 vacancies at the middle school, and we're covering for those internally. And so we've got 2 math teacher vacancies. Our team has stepped up to make our kids well supported in their math classes at this very important point in the year. And so we're going to continue with that kind of internal coverage plan until we find teachers who we believe could step in and do the work. But right now, there's no change in plan. We've got our AP teaching one of our sections, and then our 6th grade math teacher who's been with us for a while, kind of taking on an additional section. So that's the plan right now. And then we've got a teacher vacancy in science, in which our science chair at the middle school is covering that right now. And so team has stepped up. We're appreciative, and I think it's good for kids. At the high school, we've got 1 vacancy. That's a humanities learning specialist position. We're covering that internally and then actively interviewing for that right now. We're going to talk about interim assessment results momentarily, as well as STAR winter results, and I'll move us forward. With regard to college and career readiness, I talked about graduation a moment ago, and so a bit more here. So 100% of our seniors, all of our seniors have submitted at least one college application. That's as of December. And as of now, 96% of our seniors, almost all of them, have been accepted to at least one college. And that compares to 3/4 of those students back in January. So some good progress there at a very busy time of year for our college counselors. PBS-wise or culture-wise, climate-wise at the school, I talked a bit about our celebrations over the past month. We're also going to be doing some work this month in reassessing school culture at both sites using the tool that we've adopted this year called TFI. So that's happening. Family engagement wise, we've had middle school conferences. Those were last week, Thursday and Friday. And early numbers show that we had just over 70% of our families take part in conferences as of Friday. And so we met our goal of 70%. And typically what happens is our advisors double back with parents who were not in attendance during conferences to meet virtually and talk a bit about progress and where kids are. So that's family engagement. As a school that takes pride in being well-rounded, we had a big dance recital earlier this past month in February. We had 100 families take place in the event. A couple of new advisory council members took part too, so it was great. And then our after-school program also took part and hosted a showcase of their students and some of the things they've learned over the course of the year thus far. And so another nice event for kids to show off their stuff. In terms of planning for the coming year, so it's a busy time. This is where things get kind of like hyped up with regard to like we're flying the plane and focusing on things that matter right now in the school year, as well as thinking forward to the coming year. And so in the coming year, we have collected information on intent to return among staff survey results. We'll talk about those tonight. Hiring is in full swing. And there was some policy update messaging that went out last week around teacher certification. Essentially, we want for more of our students, more of our teachers to be certified in our school than has been the case over the past couple of years. And so we're ramping up and being more clear about exactly what that means and what sort of timing people have. The timing is reasonable, but we're taking a firmer line with regard to that happening. So that's in the mix. And student recruitment, it's also a busy year for that. We've got the lottery on April 1st. And so Chris and Clue Company are aggressively meeting with families, meeting with school leaders, taking part in tours, visiting schools, conducting informational sessions, which are a lot of fun, and calling interested families. And they've been doing that for the past couple of months, but this is the sort of fourth quarter of that. And so we're in pretty good form right now with work to do. So I'll say more about the data in a moment. Finally, on the development end of things, we've got two grants that we applied for locally with our borough president's office and our local council member in Williamsburg. One is to renovate the gym at the middle school. That is a hefty grant, and we've asked for $1 million. I think it's a long shot, but we're going to put it forward and see what happens. And the other is for the renovation to a nurse's office, or the creation of a nurse's office at our high school in Williamsburg. So we'll see whether that's successful, but that's happening. And we've applied for some funding for Summer Academy with Summer Boost. We've received funding from them for the past 2 or 3 years, and so we believe we'll be successful there. And then finally, we have collected dues from the 14 advisory council members that we have in place right now. And so there's been some funding coming in through them, and I think that's just the beginning. Facilities wise, we've got a renovation, a 2-year renovation, we hope, happening at 432 Monroe Street. And that's going to cause for some limitations in space over the course of the summer, as well as during the school year. We're going to lose one classroom, so we got to think about that. So we're doing some forward planning there. And then, as you know, we are also actively moving to expanding our high school facility so we can serve more students and have more space for our existing team and students. And so we've collected some owners rep proposals over the past month. I want to thank Sal and Jim for their work in helping with that. And so we think we've landed on the best option. We're going to bring that to the full board tonight. Finally, don't mean to steal Kristen's thunder, but with regard to school finance, all 4 key metrics are being met at this point in time as of the end of February. And we've been working now in the 24-25 budget. And so that's what we've been doing over the course of February and March, and thinking about whole school and all that goes into running and managing and making a school thrive.
That's it.
That's it, Sal. Unless you want to add something to the list here. And there are probably some things that we've missed. And if we have, I apologize to the team for not highlighting them. But yeah, it's a busy time. And I think one of the biggest challenges is just juggling all of this and prioritizing things, which I think is just true of any kind of field of work where there are busy times. So I'm going to move us forward a slightly different view. I just gave you some headlines and some kind of qualitative information on where we are. I now want to give you some data around that. I'm going to make this a bit bigger so you can see it. Oops, that's the wrong way. And so I've talked about enrollment. We're in good form here. Let me just say that in green here are where there are updates. So whatever is in green, I'm giving you an update tonight based on this aspect of our school. And the current status is color coded. Arguably, yellow could be red. You're either meeting your goals or not, but I've offered a little bit of variation because I think in some places we're very close or there's some nuance there worth highlighting. And so the yellows sort of represent that. For example, with enrollment, we're healthy with regard to budget, but we're not where we would like to be with regard to our SED maximum enrollment of 655. That's now being proposed for a downward change. We'll hear about that later this spring. That should be on the Regents' agenda in the coming month or two. But that gives you an example of what's going on here in terms of my thinking on where we are standing-wise. Course pass rates, we didn't look at these with the SLC this week, but I think we're in a similar position where there are a couple of areas where we're just monitoring progress. We're monitoring pass rates. And so, for example, with 7th grade and 8th grade ELA among our SPED subgroup, we are monitoring that because our pass rates are lower than what we'd like for them to be, which is 80% of our students passing a class or their classes at any point in time. So we're monitoring that pretty carefully. Melissa's on top of that with the leadership team at the middle school. Interim results, we're going to talk about that tonight, but I think the headline is there's variation across middle school and high school. In some places we're not where we want to be, in other places we're in a pretty good place. Around student nutrition, all is good. 3% of our students right now over the course of the year have thus far left the school for nuanced reasons, but we're well in line to meet our goal of less than 10% over the course of the year. Finance-wise, we're in good form. Attendance-wise, we're in good form at the middle school at 93%. We're meeting our goal there. And we've held steady at 89% at the high school. There have been some initiatives in place. I think they've held things steady, such that things haven't gotten lower. But we'd like to make progress on this and get this back up to above 90 as it's been in pre-COVID years. Suspension-wise, there is some concern here. At the high school, there have been a number of suspensions over the course of January and February. A lot of this was a result of things happening after school, in the subway, some other schools involved, et cetera. We do take that seriously. We do suspend if there's a safety issue that we feel is important to address. And in these cases, we did. And unfortunately, that has an impact on suspension and kids not being in school. But it's a hard decision that we make. So I think at the high school, we are not meeting our goal right now and are trending in a direction that leads us to having more than 10% of our students suspended on at least one occasion over the course of the year. And at the middle school, we're keeping an eye on things, but we're just over 6% at this point in time. And so we will monitor this and also teach them this proactively and make sound decisions after the fact. Are there any questions there? Any observations there? All right. Recruitment wise, we are on watch right now because it is March and this is a big month. But just to give you some numbers, we have 21 more sixth graders who applied to our school for next year than we had at this time last year. So we're kind of bucking the trend and doing better than we were last year, but we've got to finish strong. At the high school, we're up 10 applications from where we were last year. And so that's the status of things. And I've told you a bit about what actions are taking place to sort of see this trend continue over the course of the next 3 weeks. Typically, we do continue to recruit and add to our application list post-lottery, but we'd love to be in a place where, as of the lottery, we're set, all students are enrolled, and we now think about all things onboarding. Staff retention wise, I'll share out some information there. I think we're in a similar place to where we were last year, which I think is okay, pretty good. Participation wise among trustees, thank you all for being here. We'll have quorum tonight and move forward. Development wise, we're on watch just because I think at this point in time, we're behind where I think we should be at this point in the year. We want to raise 200K for a few initiatives over the year, and right now we're at 86. So we've got to raise about 120K to kind of be in good form with this specific area of our budget for the coming year. And so, more to say in the coming months there. And then finally, with extracurriculars, let's see, we're in good form. Kids continue to kind of show up after school and be a part of our activities. We're offering them a lot and they're taking advantage of it. So we feel like that offers a very wholesome package with regard to a very full school day. And those are the quantitative numbers behind some of the headlines you heard a moment ago. Are there any questions or things folks want to dig into a bit more deeply here? What I'm hearing you say is like, let's talk about strategic planning. Okay, we'll do it. Here we are. So I want to bring back our conversation about the building and where we are now. And then I want to talk about staff retention. And those will be our two deep dives with regard to strategic planning for tonight. So first, a bit of a recap. That's our dear old building right there, the before picture. And so we're proud to own it, proud to call it home, and there's work to do. So we can now do work because we own it. We talked about that last month. Here is an exciting new rendering for us. This is the new after rendering. And so you see the space, it's a lot more open. Quick kind of before and after. Oh my gosh, look at those windows and look at those windows. And windows represent openness and welcomeness and being a part of a community. And so that's what this represents, and that's what we're excited about. So this came out today, as a matter of fact. In addition, another new rendering is this is the gym, and this is facing Driggs. So you see some windows, and that's because those windows are now open at the front end of the building. And so the idea is to make this a reality over the coming 2 years. And so a bit more about that momentarily. And then finally, here's a new rendering of the dining hall, the dining commons, perhaps a multi-purpose space, or perhaps a community arts center. It's going to be all the above, but it'll take some of the pressure off the gym, which is all of those things plus a gym to create some spaces where larger groups can get together. So I'm not sure I'm quite happy with this rendering. I think there's more kids, more people talking, and maybe less tables, table space in there. So we'll think about what that looks like. But it's exciting to have a common space for people to congregate. We talked about the need. We talked about the shortages of space. I'm not going to go into detail there. And we talked about its impact on school and programming. And then we talked about what we'd like to do and what it means to sort of expand the space, the building by a floor. It would allow for us to enroll more students. It would allow for us to have more space for our existing student body. And I think this just allows for us to kind of do the work more effectively on a daily level without the stresses or inefficiencies of trying to find space in addition to doing the work within space. We talked about the budget on a very preliminary level. I'll say more about where we are with that net in a moment. And then we talked about what the fourth floor might look like. This is what I showed you a month ago. One of the new ideas here is that this perhaps is not a multi-purpose space, and we move the multi-purpose space to the second floor instead of the fourth floor. There are some efficiencies there that are being thought through with our architect team, as well as our owner's rep to be, as well as our DFC. So lots of people here weighing in on this, but that's kind of where we are in this process. Timeline is here. It hasn't changed. A big milestone for us is this sort of March date where we aim to file our layouts. There can be some changes beyond that, but making that milestone, I think, keeps things open for perhaps some work happening over the course of the summer, which then allows for us to perhaps have the building expansion completed by the end of next summer. So ambitious, but perhaps doable. That's where we are right now. So just to fill in, team, this is kind of an FYI on where things are, so people are informed. Since the last time we met, we've continued to meet with Loci, the architecture firm, to regularly advance the drawings and sharpen them. We have also interviewed 3 potential owners' representatives to manage this work. I think we've got a very skillful kind of board with expertise in this area. As a school, we're educators. We don't build buildings. We could use some help here. A lot of other schools do this. And so we're looking to bring someone on to manage this in the daily so it doesn't distract from the school. Third, we've met with a financial planning group to potentially support in the planning at the front end. And so that's an ongoing conversation. But in the next meeting, I may come to you with a proposal for exactly what this is going to look like with regard to the details of the financial modeling, the numbers on what we have, and what is in need of either fundraising or financing, and how we go about doing it. And so I'm excited to do that just because I want some peace of mind with this aspect of the work. And then finally, we've met with a former school network fundraiser who's been really good at what he's done for 20 years of the school that he's worked for or network he's worked for, and he's been helpful with guidance on things. So I have a call with him tomorrow to continue in some of that communication. And that's what's happened over the course of the past month and a half in this realm of school, the expansion of the building. Are there clarifying questions here? Or Sal or Jim, if you want to chime in and offer more, if I'm missing something here, please do. And then the second question for the team here is there anything more that we should be doing in the coming month or two so that this is happening in the right way? So I think with that big FY, now you kind of know where we are. And so another update will very likely come your way in just a few weeks during our April meeting, where I imagine there'll be lots of progress and some detailed information on each of these kind of areas of the work.
Josh, I guess I'll just say that if anyone has like questions and maybe they want to ask something offline or send an email or whatever it is, um, I'm happy to chat about it in more detail about any of the specific topics.
Appreciate it, Sal. So let's now move into the next strategic planning component of this meeting, and that's to share out just kind of where we are with staff forecasting and retention for the coming year. This is something we do at the midpoint of the year, each and every year. And this is really valuable for us in thinking about the hiring season where we prioritize our resources and time. And then I think where we gain some information from our team now about what they're aspiring for in the coming year and how we might meet them where they are and plan accordingly. So each year, we aim to retain 80% of our staff. Last year, 81% of our staff intended to return based on the survey put out, and 76% ultimately did return. So I think this offers some good information for us as we plan forward. So some data. Response rate, we got 98% of responses in, and so more data than we had last year at this time from our staff. And what you see here, let me explain the table. We ask the question, where are you with regard to your planning for the coming year? Are you coming back, in essence? Yes, maybe no, or no are the options. And so people complete that. We then ask the question, if no or maybe no, or even maybe yes, what would sway you to yes? Are there things that perhaps are in um, uh, your mind that, if addressed, could warrant a change in your plans? And get some good information there. And then we ask folks information about just what courses they might want to teach next year and a few other questions. And that's the gist of it. So we do get some good information beyond the sort of yes, no aspect of things. As I said, 81% of our staff reported yes or maybe yes, which is exactly what we had last year at this time. So same overall numbers and the same general site level percentages. So at the middle school and lower numbers, 69% of staff said yes or maybe yes. And so I think last year we we're at 64%. At the high school, it's 94%, a higher number versus I think 91% last year. And some of this is due to just the nuances of middle school versus high school. Some of this is due to just like the timing of the year. Right now, the middle school is in full gear, preparing for exams, managing school. There's a lot going on, and so stress tends to build. At the high school, there's a little more of a runway with regard to where things are moving to the end of year. Assessments. And so I think that's a part of this. There are also differences in just the way in which school happens and the way in which leaders lead. And so I think uh, some of what's here, I think, is reflected in just the way in which there's openness of communication among team. I'll say that. I think given where we are now with these percentages, there's no reason to believe we won't be in a similar place actually as of the summer where, 75% or so of our staff return. The distributions of yes to maybe yes to no to maybe no are very similar across the board from last year to this year. And so if the same actions take place among myself and leadership team with communication, we expect a similar outcome. And I think with that, what that means for hiring is potentially 30 staff being hired over the course of now through August, hopefully now through the end of June. So that's where things stand at this point in time. Are there any questions about what's been shared here? And Melissa, Juliana, Jeanette, if you've got things you want to add based on our conversation last week, please. I guess we didn't talk about this. We didn't have time for this, did we? This is new data. Juliana, Jeanette, what do you think? What's here?
Um,
My
I,
one, oh, go ahead.
Mhm.
I was just going to ask a question around surveying the staff around this staff satisfaction and leadership and that kind of stuff. Is there any correlation between middle school and high school in terms of just like staff satisfaction or leadership, effectiveness?
Melissa, how would you answer that?
We um we did that survey a little bit earlier in the year, before this, and then we do have a second one scheduled um for the spring. So we don't do them kind of in conjunction um quite yet. This one was more simply to drive our hiring, and it was at that point of the year.
Oh, right. I'm
So
saying, but I'm just, are there any indicators it's the old adage, right? People don't quit
yeah,
jobs, they quit bosses, right? So I was
yep.
just, what are the correlations, or can we do a little bit more digging in the correlations? I hear you on just the differences of the grade spans and that kind of stuff, but to me, this reads differently.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, when we did this survey, we do the survey twice a year. And when we did this survey earlier in the year, we did see a higher degree of trust at the adult level at the high school, I think. Am I mincing years, Josh? I'm not.
No.
Um,
Mhm.
and then, so I think that when Josh alluded to those, that it was a data point we were bringing in. I also anticipate from sort of the chair level through principal level, there being more leadership stability at the high school next year too. So I think that that leans in. Some of these maybe knows are folks who are managers at the middle level as well. So I think like
Mhm.
you're it does it connect? Yes, it does a little bit there too. Though surprisingly, from a results perspective, our middle school is in a stronger place.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting too.
So
Jeanette, what was your question or your commentary?
It was more zeroing in on the disparity between the middle school and high school percentage and thinking about where we are this year with the vacancies at the middle school and some of the core content areas, and if we're headed down a similar path next year and how we could get ahead of that.
Yeah, no, I think I think what Melissa just described gets at some of that, but I think a new point that you've invited here is just that, yeah, I think with those vacancies right now at the middle school where there are three and we're a little small school and people are stretched, that causes stress and friction and people not being quite as satisfied or happy with the work. And so is that reflected here? I would suspect yes. Why wouldn't it be?
Right.
Mhm. So I think on the one hand, team holding it down right now is admirable, and it's taken its toll with regard to kind of where people are and their level of morale and excitement and balance. So I think some of that's here. Another way in which we can look at this is just through the teacher and admin lens. And so what this data provides is the same distribution of yes, maybe no, and no for teachers in blue, and so the teacher numbers and percentages. So we've got among teachers, about 79% of our staff, middle school, high school, who have responded yes or maybe yes to the survey in terms of their plans for next year. And then among administrators, it is higher. It's at 86%. And so I think we have seen this before. There have been years in which we haven't seen this. And, I suspect that this is true kind of other fields as well with regard to um, people on the ground, so to speak, doing the work each and every day, feeling more of the brunt, and perhaps it's showing up with regard to like their level of satisfaction, which then shows up in their level of um, continuing in the work over the long term. Um, And so what has been helpful here with this data is in having conversations with folks about, the reasons perhaps why they're thrilled to come back next year and maybe why they're having second thoughts, and then addressing them where they are and seeing what can bear fruit and change. Other findings here worth noting, other questions? I guess, Juliana, is this surprising to you?
No, it's not. I think just, I think like all things, I just think those like Gallup poll style questions or, and also the leadership connection is just that's just continues to be like kind of the wisdom on these things, even with the higher attrition in general in the ed sector,
Mhm.
period.
Mhm. Mhm. Any other questions here? Any other observations? All right, so one other angle to look at here is at the middle school and getting a sense of for two kind of critically important departments, ELA and math, and kind of where things stand. And I think, this is significant. And so we've got ELA at the middle school and that teaching team and kind of where they stand, and then the math team for next year too. And I had mentioned earlier that we're down to math teachers at the middle school. We're covering that internally across the board. So they aren't represented here, which is why the sample size is lower. And so there are no's, in essence, we count those as sort of openings for the coming year. And so right now we've got two of our math team coming back, and then one no moving into perhaps a different sector outside of education, and then one who may be just sort of testing the waters in the coming year. And in ELA, we've got a bigger team, five who said they're coming back, and then one that said maybe, and three that have said maybe no. And that's the findings. That's the summary right now. And so I think this could mean that we could have as many as three vacancies in ELA that we're hiring for, and then in math for the two vacancies we have now, in addition to those who have said no or maybe no. So again, the dialogue matters here as well, and kind of converting those who we'd like to have back to maybe yeses and yeses. And we're now kind of gearing up in the hiring season for finding top talent to um, take on these roles in the coming year. Observations here, questions here. Okay, so just to reiterate or summarize kind of where things stand in terms of strengths, we've got a rate overall that's in line with our target of 80%. And then we've got relatively few staff members overall who have said they're intending not to return or definitely not returning. Those are good things. And then we're positioned right now to have the information we need to have some conversations. So those are the positive side of things. The challenges here is that we've got relatively lower forecasted retention among middle school math and middle school ELA. Those are important areas of our school. And some of the factors that were mentioned in the qualitative responses for why staff may be not returning related to, I think, usual suspects, but important ones: salary, career growth and trajectory, nuanced concerns or frustrations, a heavy workload, morale concerns among team during pressing times, and then in some cases, some external factors, moving out of state for family reasons, etc. So we've seen these reasons before. I don't think this is much different than what we saw last year. And so the conversations now are happening. And with that, other things happening, the analysis is taking place. We've got a pretty good kind of like model for how we organize our thoughts around staffing for the coming year and what communication is happening. I'm doing some work right now around compensation and the budget for next year, given our anticipated enrollment, and then hiring is fully kicked in. So that's the work happening now in response to the data that we receive year at this point. So here we are in hiring season. I'm going to close things out unless there are any last observations or questions or suggestions, recommendations here. Okay, so we move into the next portion of the meeting, and again, I'm doing some of this work today because Jim is in and out with some stuff at home, and so I think with that we move into committee reports and the report out from the SLC. And so Jeanette and Juliana, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we talked about headlines already. We shared out some of the SLC related headlines and talked about them on Thursday's meeting. We're going to dive into IA results and Winter Star results now. A sort of condensed version of things in comparison to what we talked about on Thursday. We've already talked about graduation rates and we've talked about retention survey. We actually didn't discuss those things last meeting because of time. And so let's dig into where things stand with IA2s at the middle school and high school. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Melissa.
Evening, Al. So we're going to start with some middle school IAs. I'll start with how we're doing, and then I'll talk about what we're doing in response. Then we'll move through to high school, and we'll deep dive on just two of the high school ones tonight to give an overall picture. As a headline, our winter IAs, both sites were primarily mock exams entirely at the middle school. So using old assessments given to the students. Those assessments are generally given in April and May. So students had seen things that they were not yet exposed to, but this gave them a true dress rehearsal that gave us enough data to plan several weeks of instruction to ready them. Our results were mixed. We'll look at that in a little bit, but generally we are underperforming where we'd hope to be by January. We're going to look at our IA data aside Winter Star data. Our STAR data actually tends to be the most predictive. So if we're looking for of course, taking those exams, answering the questions gave teachers rich information to plan from, but from a predictive standpoint, STAR is super valuable. So we'll look at those in concert, and we're a little confused because they don't always agree. And we'll move on. So let's start with some ELA here. I've got graphs for the graph bands coming up too, but just for talking points so you can see these aside some of the context and findings. We have each grade represented here with how that cohort performed last year on the state exam with on the left, and our targets on the right. So these mocks were administered in test conditions, special schedules, as close to what students will actually see on the day of the exams as possible. This team here, our ELA chair is in her second year at Unity, though a vast majority of this team is new to Unity this year, inclusive of several folks who came and started with us just before these exams were given. We do have a new curriculum this year. It is significantly more challenging than the last curriculum, and it is not necessarily backwards planned from these assessments, though they are backwards planned from the same standards. In our targets, when we look at those exam minimum targets, all the way on the right there, those are based on exceeding CSD 13. And ideally, we'd like to make 10% growth gains with each cohort. When we look at our sixth grade, we saw that they had a 34% proficiency rate on the Winter Star this year, which exceeded last year's STAR and was close to how they performed on the state exam last year, but only 24% on RAA. Again, an end of year assessment. That STAR exam is a mid-year assessment. Our seventh grade, we had 35%, far exceeding last year's Winter Star, very similar to last year's exam. And they had 33% on IA2, which is similar to their performance last year, but we identified this as a year where we wanted much more growth. We're shooting for 54% of students to be proficient by the end of the year. So we do have some room to grow here, even if we are performing similarly to how we've done in the past or even outperforming our cohort last year. And then for our eighth graders, some of our eighth graders scores on IAs look a lot like outliers because they they took for the very first time the exam online. The eighth grade is the only cohort doing the exam in this style this year. And we did see just 26% of them perform proficient here. So we did have mixed results, outperforming across the board our star reading levels as compared to last year, but underperforming our 22-23 IA results at all grade levels. And I talked about that seventh grade result. We have this represented visually here, visually and chronologically. At the left justification, we see our last year state exam results for this cohort, for each cohort, and then where we're shooting there. Any questions on the how we did? Let's talk about how we use this information to plan things going forward. What you see there, tiny little letters, is clipped from what teachers are planning against, but I wanted to give a slice of that. So 4 kind of big buckets. One is data-driven planning. This is baked into the fabric of what we do and the why we give these exams. So not only do we see these rolled up results, but we have tons of wonderful work to plan from when we give interim assessments or any assessments. So teachers have analyzed that data to plan what their coursework looks like going forward, making modifications to the planning and to the groupings that they do in class. We also kicked off a cycle of regular assessment. Students are completing weekly quizzes that look a lot like tiny pieces of those state exams. And each week we roll these into this giant data tracker that says whether students that we've identified as being the students that will need to pass if we want to hit our goals, who are likely to pass with supports, if they are on track given that exam or that quiz that they took. We've also incorporated a great deal of joy. We have a theme this year around superheroes. Kids are designing t-shirts and tie-dyeing them that they get to wear during the test. There are raffles each week with raffle tickets and exciting prizes. Kids are planning a sort of like a sketch like performance to hype each other up before exams. So we're trying to make this a positive experience, even though it's pretty high intensity. And if you look through this plan, this is restructuring classes around the most important standard skills and question types that kids need experience. Need to experience and work on. And we've also really leaned heavily into small group instruction. So in addition to our regular tutoring block with that worked in to our school day, we have center work and small group instruction baked into the core of our day so that students are getting high dosages of attention and feedback from their teachers. Any questions on our response here? Any pitches for things that might be missing? You should come see and wear your Marvel gear. It's a sight to behold. Or DC, like no, either way. People like different things. We'll go through a similar process with math. You know how the chart works. Context here, same thing. This was given in a testing setting. Our eighth graders, again, we're taking that math exam online for the first time. Our team is a little bit different here. We began the year with the most stable team. We have a department chair who's been with us since 2018, I think, and all of the team was returning with an additional interventionist. Unfortunately, as the year went on, Josh talked about this earlier, we lost 2 math teachers, one of them right before, in the weeks before this exam was given. And that is in 6th grade, where we see the most glaring outlier, low outlier, with only 6% proficiency rate on that IA. So we're watching that group very closely. Results were otherwise mixed. Our 7th grade, when we look at STAR, was closest to how they performed last year again, and then their benchmarks this year, and exceeded the IA performance of the 7th grade cohort last year. So we're seeing stronger results there. The other groups were further away, with 8th grade being off track and 6th grade being far off track. When we look at our weekly quiz data, we don't see quite that spread, but this did cause some need for some intensified planning, and I can share what that looks like in just a second. Josh, you want to go onto the chart? We're just going to share the same data. Questions here on the how we did. Okay, and then let's go to our data response there. Very similar in structure to some of the responses we saw with ELA, because we take a school-wide approach here. So kids will be feeling both the seriousness as well as the excitement across all classes here. And we've, again, followed a similar structure each week with a predictable quiz day, times that we're planning from the quiz. The quiz is on Wednesday. By Friday, there's kind of individual coaching and redo sessions based on that quiz data, as well as some independent practice that strengthens the work for kids if they are performing strongly. And the key concepts that existed within that exam have been used to plan reteach lessons throughout the week. And those stations provide opportunities for kids to get some concerted time with that teacher. Concentrated time. Cool. Questions there? All right. Similar with high school, I'll spend a little less time on the high school because the high school is beginning their exams in a week and a half. So the next time we meet, we can deep dive into the mock data that is just a little bit more imminent, the way this middle school data was to high school data. So headlines, we're uneven. ELA 2 and Global History 2 seem to be directionally on track. Similar US history and earth science with the sit-down portion of their exam. Off track, the number of our STEMS courses: Algebra 1, Living Environment, Geometry, Chemistry, and Algebra 2. Also, this exam was given in a mock test environment. We had a schedule. Actually, we had some actual regions going on at the same time, so kids felt that degree of seriousness along with that test, and kids had an opportunity to sit down and take a 3-hour exam, which they had not done before. For several of our courses, we did move to a mock exam and giving a released Regents exam. Those students had not seen all of the content that's on these exams. It gives kids 2 opportunities to take an exam like that, and it gives that baseline for questions that we haven't reached for teachers. We've done that with exams that exceeded 60% of the content being taught. Josh, let's deep dive on, let's go to algebra, and then we'll do ELA. So algebra is one that we've identified as being off track. And we're doing a little bit of forecasting here because this exam will be different. The state of New York has redesigned this exam this year. We have moved to the curriculum that most district schools and schools like New Visions, and then I even know Uncommon is considering this year, in order to meet that level of rigor. But we're doing some forecasting using prior exams. This year, students had been exposed to about 65% at this point. So we are we weren't expecting this to be an exact analog for the regions. And so here we saw only 14% of students meeting that benchmark now. At the mid-year point, 14% of our kiddos have learned enough Algebra 1 to be considered proficient by the state of New York and graduate that amount of content. However, another 40.8% of students already at the mid-year mark were in that bucket that was close by. That's a bucket that has been an appealable score in the past. So we expect right now, with even not changing anything, not planning from this data, that at least that amount of students would be proficient by the end of the year. That would bring us to about 55%, which is still too low and below our goal. However, would exceed our performance for last year. So directionally with this course, we think we're on the right path, given what we know about that exam, which is, you know, a lot, but not 100% of everything. We've never seen a released one. We've seen some released questions. Though we do think that we have to accelerate in order to meet our goal of 80% or even to exceed our 2022 and 2019 performance. Questions? Are we tired of graphs yet? I promise just one more. Let's do ELA for this one, Josh. This is in a similar place. We shifted, we gave, in the past, we picked our like best passages, the ones we think align to our curriculum the best. This one we gave an honest regents to students, and we saw 53% of students receive a score that would qualify them for the regents this year. That is good news because that exceeds how we performed last year with just 43% of students. So we feel that we are on track to beat our goal last year. However, we're hoping to exceed that 70% goal that we've set there. The good news here is that additional 17% of students were in that bucket where they were close. They're not learning new information that they're going to apply to this test, but they are going to have a lot more practice. So we're confident that we should be able to beat that number. The footnote here is that we will have a number of students who were unsuccessful last year, and even some the year before that, take this exam. So this does not represent every single test taker. So we are hoping to accelerate that group, both groups, a little bit more. And we're hopeful that we'll hit our goal here. But there are a lot of moving pieces that we're thinking about a ton. Let me tell you one way we're going to address those pieces. So the middle school has the luxury of time in middle school schedules and the forethought this year to bake in response to data time each week for kids. So we have that tutoring block, and that tutoring block has been used flexibly each week so that when we see students are not achieving what they need to on a weekly basis, we can pull them into tutoring. And some kids stay there all year because they just need that regular support. High school schedules are notoriously hard to do that with because we have to have minimum 7 periods a day if we want to graduate kids on time, and multiple options for kids within the schedule. So the high school has met this by making some adjustments and doing what they're calling IA Pep Week. So in addition to that data-driven planning that teachers have done to do reteach lessons in their class, having co-teachers pull small groups, et cetera, all those good things we do each time. We're doing this IA Pep Week where teachers are taking those students who were in those almost buckets I was referencing, as well as some students who are far below but could benefit from this time, and doing small group concentrated instruction around test preparation. So not just in response to what they're learning in the class, maybe in the essays that they're writing, et cetera, but to get ready for this test. They're teaching into study skills as well. It's high school. The exams are a little bit more sophisticated. There's an expectation of like organization and studying that we're doing here. And then there's also just some fun. I referenced the fun before. You can see in that green, there's a pep rally that's going to happen. You cannot tell, but there is going to be a step flash mob performed by the adults, not me. So it should be successful because I have no rhythm. So it's going to be really exciting for kids too, as we try to really lean into building an exciting culture around these academic moments. Cool. Josh, I can't hear you. Are you
I
muted?
thought I hit that button. I'm sorry. So that was a longer but important showing of what was discussed during the SLC meeting on Thursday. Before moving on to the other committee debriefs, are there any questions here about academic or student learning related areas of school. Um, all right, so other committee reports, the AFC, and so I think what was discussed during that meeting on Friday was we talked a bit about investment opportunities. That's something we have to bring the full board, some technicalities there. We talked about workers' comp. Chris had a quick question there that was resolved. We talked about kind of the budget for the coming year, and I think within that, we talked about, or I presented out in some of the challenges moving in the coming year. So we've got less funding at the federal level than what we've had over the past few years as COVID funding goes away. And so with that, there's impact on thinking about kind of like staffing and related areas of school. And then we talked a bit about contributions, which I mentioned earlier in this meeting, as we've got a bit of a gap we want to fill. And so I think in addition to that, we talked about just where we are in February. And so I guess, Kristen, if you want to share out kind of where things stand in general form, we'll go there now and maybe focus in on the 4 metrics.
Okay.
And what I'll do is I'll give you a screen sharing, which you have.
You got it. Thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about the February results. As Josh indicated earlier in the meeting, we are meeting all of the 4 NICEAD benchmarks based on our current results. When we look at our bond covenants, which include Unity and FONB, we are currently meeting our covenants and are anticipating to meet our covenant for the debt service ratio when we exclude out the debt service expenses or the bond financing expenses, which would strip it down to what a normal year would look like. So again, the bond covenants we just look at right now just to kind of see how we're tracking. It's not a requirement for this fiscal year. So just keeping an eye on that. Moving on to the balance sheet, no major changes from last month. We're still awaiting a determination on our flood expenses. But we're working with the insurance company on that. When we look at year to date as of February 29th, we are doing a little bit better than we were last year. We're at 762,000 surplus, which is a good position, and it's growing each month, which is something we would like to see right now. When we project out, and I think this is the most important screen right now, when we project out for year end, where are we projecting that surplus to be? So right now we're at 762,000, but as we move through these next few months and we have our accrual entries and everything that have to happen at year end, we are projecting a $402,000 surplus right now. Now that assumes we meet our fundraising and contribution goals. If we do not meet those goals, we still are in a slightly positive position at around 90,000. So good spot to be in. And then when we talk about cash on hand for our cash flow, we're still having that concern of meeting the NICEAD benchmark when it comes to June. So we'll have further discussions about that as we move into the April AFC meeting. And we'll try to start coming up with a game plan of what we're going to do about that particular benchmark. That is it. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to dive in further, but that's just a quick overview.
Thank you, Kristen. And so going back to committee report outs in the AFC, I guess just Jim or Jeanette, if you've got anything you want to add before we move on to the other committees, feel free to chime in now. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, so with the DFC, Development and Facilities Committee, all of our meeting on Wednesday was devoted to reviewing and discussing 3 different owners' representative proposals. And so we want to share out those with you today and ultimately have the board vote on the approval on the one that we feel is best suited given our needs and interests right now. So Sal and Jim chime in as you see fit. I'll take the lead on kind of sharing out where we are. So this table just offers a summary of the different owners reps that offered proposals to us over the course of last week. This was rather fast. And so we contacted folks 2 or 3 weeks ago and then received proposals last week. And then we're on the phone with each of these groups last week to talk about the ins and outs of their proposals. And so we've got kind of duration in mind. This proposal specifically would cover the term in which we would begin tomorrow as soon as we can, and then it would take us through the time in which we're ready to sort of collect bids on construction. And so a fairly short time frame, we'd like to begin doing that in May and June. And so this is only a few months in which we would be engaging in this sort of arrangement with owners reps. Sal and Jim, is that accurate? Would you add anything there? They might be offline for a moment. And so,
We covered most of it, Josh.
okay, cool. So in thinking about cost here, I'll just kind of explain what things are. So MJM is a group we've worked with before. They actually are very much connected with being the prior landlords of our building and owned the building before we did and know the building intimately well. I'll say a bit more about that periodically. But cost-wise, there is a bit of a difference. But I think in general, this would be the highest bid from MJM at 30K a month. So this is not like cheap work. This is really important work and kind of moving things forward over again the short term to get us ready for bids. DBI, a second group that we spoke with, their bids include a 10K monthly bill for 2 months of work or something more intensive and in line with what we really need, a 25K monthly bill for full project management. A third group that we spoke with decided not to take part in a proposal just because of the time frame of things and their own staffing, and so it just didn't work out or align. And then the last group we worked with, and we slightly cheaper with regard to cost, although not insignificant. And so they came in at 20K for a work plan or 18.5 for work up to pre-construction. We did a bit of analysis on the pros and cons of each of these proposals. And so in addition to cost, let me kind of talk a bit about these. So with MGM, I think the pros here that they will likely be the fastest and the most efficient in doing the work. They know the facility inside out, literally, because they owned the building before we did, and then helped us with the renovation. We're very active in the renovation. We like the idea of them being able to help us in value engineering the work, so ensuring that we get a really, really good value for what it is that we're putting forward with the expansion. And, we've got limited resources, so that's important. On the cons end, it's the higher of the bids that we have by some amount. And they have relatively less experience with other charter schools. I think that's worth naming. While they know our building, this isn't like they don't just sort of do this for charter schools across the board. Sal, is that fair?
That's fair. I think you were nice to them in the cons. I'm sure there's some personalities, I guess, that are there that we're going to deal with, but
And there are pros and
we'll
cons
leave that
of
off the list.
So in terms of DBI, I think so I think right now, just to kind of put you in a place where we are, we do feel that moving forward with MGM in this sort of first phase of owners rep up to like bids and pre-construction makes sense for us as a school, mainly because we feel like they offer the most efficient and expeditious process for allowing us to begin construction this summer, which would then put us in a place of seeing this building in completion by the fall of 2025, which has a consequence, enrollment-wise, financially, et cetera. So we feel like that is a significant factor here. The second group who we like a lot and perhaps could work forward with in the future is DBI. And so the pros of DBI is that they do work with a lot of charter schools, and we know a lot of the same people, and they've got a good reputation. And they were very responsive and communicative with us throughout this process, and so impressive group. On the cons end, they seem to be less aware of the facility, and that's real with regard to thinking about like expeditiousness and efficiency. So they would need more time to kind of onboard this process, which is just not something we feel like we have a lot of right now. And so in general, we feel like they'd be less fast and perhaps less efficient in this work. So that was the second group. The third group, pros here include they reflected competence. They've done this work before with entities, nonprofits, maybe fewer schools than DBI, but they've worked with schools before, mostly private schools based on their literature. And then on the cons end, yeah, relatively less experience with charter schools in comparison to DBI. Don't know our building at all, as MGM does. And their proposal was a bit less detailed. Sorry for the typo there, I think. So, Sal, would you add anything to the mix in terms of this summary analysis?
No, I did pop off for a hot second, but I think the big thing, maybe you already kind of outlined this, is sort of the two-part nature. I mean, there's many parts, but the big step right now is just getting to the point where we're allowed to put a quote unquote shovel in the ground, which is to getting the building permits and making sure we have sort of a really good idea of costs, and we're able to what's called value engineer, which is like reduce any costs that we can see and cut where we think we can. And for that, as Josh probably already said, we think MJM is the group to go with, given their past experience. And you know, they really they have an urgency that they understand, and that we have as well. Separately, eventually, when construction does start, there is going to be some management component that's needed for that. And I think for that, we might need to think about potentially it's DBI. But Josh, we'll kind of reevaluate that at that time. But as we sit here today, that might be a real option then, if you think that's, you know, fair to say.
So I think during the approval portion of the meeting, we'll come back to this, but that's the overview at this point in time. And so as we just kind of stay loyal to committee reports, the other topic of communication during our meeting was just around development. And so this was kind of where we are right now. So we're thinking about a capital campaign of perhaps $3 million. And so next steps for us at this point in time include in this month, we've got a presentation deck that I've been working on with a few others. And so I want to kind of put that in a good place. And then I think the other move as we move forward with this campaign and development is compiling a donor list of high net worth folks and then beginning to kind of meet with those donors over the course of the spring. This is a near-term goal. I think the meetings would happen over the course of the next 6 months. But this is what will likely be needed in order to sort of see this through successfully and have the school in a very positive place. And then we talked a bit about, actually, we didn't talk about this because we ran out of time, but I think the other note for this month is, as I've said before, thus far this year, without, you know, any real work, we've raised just under $100,000. And for the budget this year, we've got a $200,000 line of contributions. And so there is some work to do in just shoring up and filling this gap over the short term. So some initiatives here around development. And so that's real. This is an earlier rendering. I'm using the word rendering to describe a table. This is an earlier table from January of kind of where things are donation-wise at this point in time. There are a few additional donations that came in January and February, mainly from our advisory council folks, so about $5,000 in addition to this, but this is where things stand right now. And so the vision is to expand this out notably over the course of the coming months. And I think more generally and in the long term, this is something that we've got to dive more deeply into as a school and as a board, such that the school is in a good place financially, and we're using those resources to provide the fullest education we can to our kids. So the next committee report is with Enrichment and Community Partnership, and that's with Trudy and with Sal. And so just some headlines here in terms of reports. This is a timeline that you saw during the last meeting, and I think we're going to stay with this. Unfortunately, we weren't able to carry through the walkthroughs that we had planned in January and February. One was just due to just a conflict of schedules on members' ends, and the other was an issue on the school's end. So I want to bring those back in the spring, so expect a rescheduling of that. And this is a quiet month. It's a busy month at the school. We don't have anything planned with regard to board members taking part in events, but in April, just a few weeks, we've got our career day coming up, and Jim is RSVP'd for that. And so that's happening. And then later on in May, we've got an art exhibition happening at the high school. And so Julian and Sal have RSVP'd for that. And so that's where things stand there. Couple of notes with the UAC, the Unity Advisory Council. So we've made good progress, and so I think it's worth noting this. This was an idea back in October and November, like nothing existed. And so we've made, I think, really impressive progress with regard to where we are now. So from the idea to like where we are as of March, we've got 13 UAC members who are really in the school. Like they're ready to kind of take on the world and like be a part of the school in ways that make sense. And so they've given me some time. They've shown up at school events, and they've also raised a bit of money for us as well. And so that's happened over the course of the past 2 months. And we want to build this out. And I'd love to have 25 members by the end of this month. And I think it's very easy and can happen. So I may be reaching out to some of you all to tap into your networks in thinking about people who might be especially well suited for this sort of support work for a mom and pop school. So in terms of expertise of this team that we have, the 13 UAC members we now have. And so I want to thank Sal for like connecting me and the school with a few members in his network who are now going to be really good for our kids and for our community. And so I think the expertise run the gamut. We've got some folks in higher ed and college counseling. We have some people who are involved in college and career programming. Some people work in sales and marketing, could help us with our branding. People who are involved in kind of mentoring and internships, which is important and something that we need to build up over the near term, and supporting kids both in school and out. Some people that work in strategy and analytics, corporate services, financial management, asset management, and then some people who work on like the individual level with kind of coaching and development professionally and personally. So some great expertise to tap into as we think about how to expose our schooling kids to more talented folks. And so that's where things stand now. So let's see. I think with that, we move into items for approval tonight. And we do have quorum with Juliana, with Sal, with Trudy, Jim, and Jeanette in the mix. And so the first item are minutes for the January meeting, the January 23rd meeting. And so I guess if there are any questions about those minutes, they were disseminated on Monday morning. And they were reviewed by at least one board member before going live. So thanks, Jeanette, for doing that. Are there any questions there? All right. And just in terms of quorum here, Jim, you're back on. So I'm going to have you kind of do the official approval.
Okay, all in favor? Any questions, first of all? No? Good. Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
Okay, and just good evening, Trudy. Thanks for making time. I know you had a busy day, so I appreciate seeing you into the wee hours of the evening here. We're 8:24. Jim, next item is owner's rep work. We did do a summary of that and report out some of the work that you and me and Sal did over the course of the past week. And so I think the proposal here is to go with MJM, which we feel is best suited given our interest of school of being in a position to break ground and do some construction work this summer. So this would be a 3 or 4 month proposal and working with MJM. And so the expertise are there in our minds, and they are not the cheapest option. And so, I think that's worth just noting that we do feel they're best, even if they aren't the cheapest option here. Jim, would you add anything?
I would not. I think that's exactly right. I think once we get through the speed that they're able to operate on, I don't know that they're going to be more expensive.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Josh. I don't know that $30,000 a month now, but if we're a year late, that's what, $500,000 in revenue, not revenue, sorry, in additional income that would be missing, right? Versus another 2-month ramp up with like DBI, for example, or whatever it is. So
yeah, that's not worth it. And I think maybe the other note here that Kristen would want me to say is that like this, so right now we're in this space where FOMB is its own entity. It now owns the building, but it acts in tandem with the school and supports the school. And so ultimately, this would be something that FOMB would be paying for. So at this point in time, it makes sense for both the school board as well as the FOMB board to act in tandem. And so I think tonight is about the Unity board weighing this out for approval, and then the FOMB board doing something similar in the coming 48 hours.
Okay, any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? All right, thank you.
And so I'll move back to the approval items for tonight. So I think this was approved. The last item on the agenda for approvals was the 24-25 calendar. This came to the board last meeting, and the board voted to approve the calendar that was presented with the input of the SLC. And so we're bringing it back to you tonight, just for formality's sake, but we did discuss this at the AFC call on Thursday. And so couple of updates with regard to where the calendar stands now in comparison to where we were in January. And so we did some research internally and looked at a few other schools, some bigger schools, and what they do calendar-wise, both in prior years as well as in the coming year, and looking at some drafts. And generally speaking, the number of instructional days varies between 180, 183, with a few nuances here and there. But like we're in the realm of what some of the other network charters are doing with regard to number of instructional days. So I think that was something that came up last meeting that we've done some research on and feel confident about with regard to how many days our students are experiencing school and classes. In terms of the new look or set of decisions around the calendar for the coming year, something else we're thinking about now and proposing is some divergence between our middle school calendar and our high school calendar. And we haven't done that before, but I'm seeing other schools do that more often, and it makes sense given the differing calendar priorities, specifically exams happening at different points in the year at the high school versus the middle school. And so positioning our calendar to reflect those competing commitments. So at the middle school, what that looks like is we've moved to starting school 6 days earlier than we typically do in a given year, and then ending school earlier at the end of the year. Typically, those days of school in late June tend to be less productive than the initial days of school. So we feel like this is better for kids, better for team, and allows for us to have additional days of instruction prior to some of those assessments happening in the spring. So that's a new look, something we haven't done before, but I think was spurred by some of the conversation back in January. And so I think with that, that's the big change. I think the other kind of element to this is in thinking about holiday observations. What we'd like to do moving forward is be somewhat objective here. And so in thinking about some of the days of school that the DOE observes that other schools may not, and there is some variety in looking at various charter schools and other non-public schools in there about what days they take off in observing religious holidays, et cetera, and which days they're on. So for us, we will observe moving forward some of the holidays, including Diwali, the Lunar New Year, Eid, Rosh Hashanah, et cetera, when we have a student body that meets the threshold of 10% or more of those families who observe the holiday. And so that feels more objective and more sort of clear than what we've done before. And I appreciate that. I think our staff would appreciate that, and families would appreciate that clarity too. Obviously, during those holidays, families can take them off and they're excused, and staff have the ability to sort of take them off and have them honored as well. So we've always done that. We'll continue to do that. So I think that's another nuance to the calendar that the last meeting brought to the forefront of our minds and thinking about how to make this sort of system and process clearer and better. The last bit is that we have identified the days in which the DOE is not in session and the days in which we are in session. Those are typically days of school in which we might experience 10 to 15% additional students not in school because families may have them home because the DOE isn't in session. So having that way in advance and thinking about that strategically as we design the calendar, I think is helpful. It positions us to then early on minimize the students who may be out just because the DOE is out as well. So those are a couple of things that came up. In summary form, this is what the calendar looks like in 24-25, with there being some difference in the middle school versus the high school versus where we were last year. And so you can see the total number of instructional days at the middle school and high school. You'll see when we start versus when we end for both sites. And as I said earlier, one big change is starting earlier at the high school, middle school, and then ending early. What's also nice or informative about this table is it provides kind of a snapshot of the days off, both for leaders at sites as well as for teachers. The total number of days of summer school happening, as well as like professional development or training happening over the course of the year, both over the duration of the last couple of weeks of August, as well as during the school year. So some of this was borrowed and looking at how other networks sort of analyze and compare their schedules longitudinally, which I appreciate. And so we're doing some of the same thing here, and we'll continue with this way of thinking about calendar and time. Juliana or Jeanette, would you add anything to the mix in thinking about what we discussed on Thursday? Questions from the full board? So I think going back to the items for approval tonight, Jeanette, this is really just we're bringing this back to board for another vote. It's not something we're required to do, but I think it's good practice. Is that accurate in terms of formality?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have to because the board gave authority last time, subject to SLC review, but not a bad thing to sign off on the final version.
So I think with that, Jim, if you want to put forth a vote, we'll close things
Okay,
out.
great. Any other questions? We good? Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
Okay. So I think we're closing things out at 8:33. Next meeting will be April 16th, 7 p.m. meeting. It's a meeting virtually. And the items we'll discuss include a preliminary 24-25 budget. We'll be talking about the 24-25 strategic plan, which will focus in on college persistence as a North Star and what we're doing at each level of the school to make that happen. So I've got some new data which has been helpful to look at recently that we're analyzing. And so building our plan around that goal, I think aligns with our mission and is good for kids and families. We'll share out high school IA results. Those are IA3 results and the action planning going on there. Those are happening in 2 weeks. And we'll provide additional updates on the expansion work. I hope to have a lot to offer there in terms of the work that's taking place over the coming month. And we'll provide some staff and student updates, recruitment updates, because it's an important point in the year for those things, as well as any development updates. That's going to cover it. So that's what we intend to look at in April. And just a note, our May 21st meeting will be in person in Williamsburg. So have that in your calendar and look forward to that too. I think with that, if there's no other items, Jim, we can close out tonight.
All right, everybody good to go? Anybody have anything they want to take up in an executive session? Or are we good? Okay. Close it out. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great
Thanks,
evening.
everyone. Have a
Bye
nice
all.
week.
Bye.
Take care now.